Welcome to your first video for Unit 3, Constructing and Deconstructing Expressions and Equations. So we're going to begin this unit by constructing expressions and equations from context. So again, we're going to start with an arithmetic expression and equation and translate it into an algebraic expression and equation. So let's read the directions. Your job pays $13 an hour plus an additional $70 per week for traveling expenses. Now part A says, if you worked 10 hours last week, what will your weekly salary be in dollars? And I'm going to highlight our goal in green. Be sure to indicate every step in your process. Okay. So we're going to do this step by step. Okay. Starting with, we know that you work 10 hours and you get $13 an hour. So 10 hours times $13 per hour will give you $130. Okay. Next, we're going to need to add on the $75 you got per week for traveling expenses, and we need to add that on to the previous amount, $130. So we'll take $130, add on $75, and that will give you a total of $205 as your weekly salary. Okay. So now notice we did this in two parts, and this may seem like the obvious way to do this, or the most intuitive way. You take the number of hours, dollars per hour, compute that amount, and then add on the $75 per week. But now let's see what string of operations written horizontally can be used to determine your weekly salary last week. Well, we want to write, notice this is two separate equations. These aren't equivalent expressions. This equation equals $130. This equation equals $205. But this equation is a result of this one. Okay, so we want to put all of these pieces together and do this in one horizontal step. So we're going to leave out the units in this case. We're going to take the 10 and we multiplied it by 13, and then we added 75. Okay, and our result was 205. Okay, so this expression represents your weekly salary last week, and then this is the simplified version after we evaluate or simplify this. Okay, so notice this is the correct order of operations. We didn't need to add parentheses. We multiply first, and then we perform addition. Let's look at the next part. The number of hours you work per week varies. Define a variable for the unknown number of hours you work per week. I'm going to change that to green because that's our goal. Okay, so we need to define a variable for the number of hours you work per week. Why don't we call this H for hours? So H equals the number of hours you work per week. Okay, so notice again when we're defining variables, we want to say what we're measuring. Well, we're measuring time. We're measuring time in hours, and specifically, you want to add this that you work per week because we need to know, is it what you work per week, per month, per year? So the $75 corresponded to per week, so it'd be different if we didn't put per week. If we put per year, then you would get 52 of these $75. So always be very specific. Now we're asked to construct an expression representing your weekly salary using the variable you defined in Part C. So we're going to use this variable, and we're going to use the work from Parts A and B as a guide. And we'll focus on B because here we have it. This part is the expression, so notice it says an expression. And which one of these values is the number of hours you worked per week? We want to replace that with the variable H. So notice it says you worked 10 hours last week, so we should replace 10 with H. So we're going to write this as, I don't know why I wrote that in script, I'm going to write it in print now, h times 13 plus 75. So you take the number of hours you work, you multiply it by $13 per hour, and add your $75 per week. And you know by now when we have h times 13, we typically write this in a more simplified form as 13h plus 75. So we like to write our variables with a coefficient that's juxtaposed next to the variable as opposed to multiplication. Okay. So this is our expression that represents your weekly salary in dollars when you work h number of hours per week. So we could put in 20 and find out how much you make for 20 hours per week, 100 hours per week, but you shouldn't do that, especially if you're in school. Any amount of hours we could put in. Now let's look at the last question. 1 week, your salary was $296. And now we're asked to construct an equation that models this situation using the variable you defined in Part C. Okay. Well, remember this expression right here, so we have an expression ready, equals your salary. Okay. So if we know your salary was $296, we could say that we could take 13 times the number of hours you worked, add on $75, and the result is $296. Okay. So this equation, we will learn how to solve equations such as these, or maybe you remember how to solve them from a previous class. But this equation is we could solve for the number of hours you would need to work per week to earn $296. Okay. So this was an example of an expression and equation from context, and now we're going to start building equations using symbolic forms.